Had an opportunity to meet Jeff Lowry. Richard Lowry, I'm sorry. I'm looking right at it. This is what happens when you get older, man. Right? Some of us? Okay. Richard is going to talk about the People's Choice Awards. So folks, get ready to write down some information because you still have an opportunity to vote for the finalist, the person that's going to be the finalist. But Richard, talk a little bit about yourself first. I mean, it's fascinating listening to you and all this stuff. I know you cannot give us all of it in the minutes we have, but just give us a little bit of background on you and what led you up to being here.
Thank you, Bob. And I really feel honored to be here today among all these wonderful authors. I'm just a storyteller. And the way I got involved in storytelling was back during Desert Storm. I've always been interested in current events and military history and always been interested in writing. So when Desert Storm started, like all of you, maybe some of you soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines that are out there now fighting the war, were a little too young to remember this, like I do. But I sat in front of my television and watched the first primetime war in history. And we watched smart bombs going into their targets, and we watched night vision of attacks on Baghdad. And when it was all over, I sat there in front of my television and said, what happened? The media didn't tell us really what happened in that war. It went by so fast that the 100 hours that we fought the ground war, then the media went on to the liberation of Kuwait City, the freeing of our POWs, the uprising in southern Iraq, and then the violent suppression of that uprising, and they didn't tell us what happened. And I remembered hearing General Schwarzkopf's last briefing that he gave. And offhand, in the middle of the briefing, he said that there was a large tank battle going on. And it hadn't been concluded yet, but victory was assured. And then he went on to talk about the rest of the operation. And I sat there for days going, well, what happened in that tank battle? The media never really told us what happened in that tank battle. So I set off on a mission to find out what really happened in Operation Desert Storm. And as a hobby, as an avocation, because I was running my own company at the time, I conducted research and I wrote letters to all the commanding generals of every unit that was on the ground there. And I started amassing a massive amount of information to the point several years later that I said I could write a book. So I wrote my first book, The Gulf War Chronicles, which tells what happened in Operation Desert Storm. And then came 9/11. And because of 9/11, it's not part of the story for today, but the business that I had, I was forced to close. And I had to make a career choice in my life. I was in my 50s, and I had been working in the technical field, designing computer chips, and I said, I'm going to change my career. My kids were grown and they were out in school, and I said, I'm going to become a writer full-time, and I'm going to finish this book about Desert Storm. And I published that book in 2003. And then I moved on, and I knew that another fight was coming, especially after 9/11. And I said, well, I'm going to write a book, a sequel to my first book, and I'll make it about Operation Iraqi Freedom. Well, in hindsight, we know that you can't write a single book about Operation Iraqi Freedom. So I zoomed in and I narrowed in on my desire to write a book, and I wrote a book about the first major battle of Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Battle of Nasiriyah, Marines in the Garden of Eden. And from then I went on to write a book about Fallujah, which will be out next year. New Dawn will be available in May of next year. And funny things happened along the way. It started out with my own personal curiosity about what had gone on in Operation Desert Storm and then in Iraq, to I've become a storyteller and a teller of stories of the brave young men and women that have been fighting this global war on terror. And I have been honored to talk to many, many veterans of the battles in the war in Iraq. And I have had the opportunity to walk among heroes. I've had soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines tell me that they couldn't tell their stories to anybody else. And the message that I think that I want to get out to the listeners is that if we want to hear your stories. The American people need to hear your stories. When you come home, tell us your stories. It will not only help us to understand what you've been through, but it will help you. It'll help you to share with us the burdens that you've had. And I think in conclusion, I'd like to say to all of the young men and women that are around the world fighting for freedom and fighting for us here in America, thank you very much for sacrificing everything and leaving your families to protect my family.
Thank you for all you do, Richard. Do you want to close and go over People's Choice Awards again? Okay. Thank you, Richard. What I want to do